How do the parallelisms between Buddhist and feminist ideologies provide a basis for which compassion can initiate social change? In order to understand the intersectional framework of interconnected individuals and communities, the examination of sexism, racism, and anger as components of suffering will be explained. Rita Gross deconstructs the suffering inherent in sexism, examining gendered identity as a constraint that simultaneously upholds male dominance and binds people to structured roles. Combining feminist and Buddhist ideologies, she states that in order to eliminate this suffering, one must begin by eliminating gender roles. In the Buddhist realm, it is understood that the enlightened mind exists beyond gender, and Gross posits that egolessness must be viewed in its intended form, through a genderless lens. She argues that holding on to gender identity is a barrier to enlightenment, which, in a feminist Buddhist sense, means both the mental state that transcends suffering and the compassionate space in which men and women throughout society are equal and their oppressions are understood. Buddhism and feminism each focus on suffering, which, in the feminist realm, is attributed to systemic patriarchy. The destruction of patriarchal systems is assumed to eliminate sexism. However, the problem with directing attention towards patriarchy is that it creates an other, which is counterproductive when attempting to establish compassion for the proposed enemy. Gross proposes that understanding the roots of suffering by securing the actual problems without alienation is key. Egolessness serves as an aspect of Buddha Dharma that is influential and applicable to feminist theology. It is characterized as a basic state of mind that directs the individual towards an openness that cultivates strength, dignity, and a sense of invulnerability. This state of mind establishes a gentleness that is served as a dialogical tool for social change that ultimately prevents alienation. Melanie Harris examines Buddhism as a resource for healing from racism and other forms of oppression, combining it with feminist ideologies that focus on love and justice in order to deconstruct intersectional issues that arise from repression at the hands of westernized patriarchy. She notes that there exists a dualism between body and spirit, characteristic of the individualistic Western world. For women of color, this dualism is not livable, as their human spirit and identities cannot be separated from their physicality. To civil rights activists such as Bernice Johnson Reagan and Martin Luther King Jr., self and community are intertwined, and it is through compassion that individuals may not only understand communities of the oppressed, but understand the oppressor as well. The issues of racism that feminism confronts is parallel to the Buddhist concept of suffering. To dispel suffering, feminism and Buddhism each acknowledge the power of love as a cornerstone of compassion, and work to transform suffering into wisdom and strength. Feminist and Buddhist ideologies take similar paths when dissecting victim anger. There are two paths in which feminists encourage the channeling of anger, one which upholds the anger as a human right, the other which works to use the energy of anger towards something constructive. The latter pathway is parallel to Buddhist teachings. Buddhist practice works to eliminate anger by releasing it from its repressed state and rerouting its expression, as anger itself is painful to feel and is regarded as one of the three poisons that drives unsatisfactory cyclic existence. The clarity that can arise from such emotions surfaces on a higher intellectual level when the issues at hand are identified and compassion is utilized for the handling of the entire process. Social change is more easily attained when approached gently, and even if change is not catalyzed, the individual person is in a better mental state. In order to counteract systemic patriarchy in the secular world as well as the religious, we should discourage aggression that fuels culturally upheld male privilege in the form of anger. Gross suggests that instead of othering the male demographic, men should choose to renounce anger. Alice Keefe compares the Buddhist focus of selfishness as the root cause of disconnectedness to the feminist stress on sexism as the root cause of overcoming dualistic patterns of patriarchy. She states that the nature of interdependency is central to both movements, both sharing a this-worldly approach targeting sources of injustice, suffering, and ecological devastation. Keefe examines the Dharma's role in mandating social transformation and the Buddha's teachings on suffering, compassion, and selflessness, the foundation of which is housed in the doctrine of interdependence. This doctrine teaches that we all live in a world of mutual causality. We exist as inter-are. This circulates back to the concept of understanding the enemy as not separate from ourselves, since the origins of violence are not only held within the beings who create it, but exist in the ways in which the victims react. Feminism, too, is trying to forge a path to interconnectedness by overcoming internalized patriarchal structures, including self-hatred and discomfort with sexuality. Both movements expand on the individual, encouraging self-understanding in the scope of community. This is especially important in individualistic Western society, which largely ignores the importance of compassion and actually promotes selfishness. The ultimate solution is selflessness, which was demonstrated by Chi Mai, a Vietnamese nun who set herself on fire to illustrate her interconnectedness with the suffering of the people of Vietnam. This was not a move to gain personal attention, as self-immolation is considered an impiety. Ultimately, her life was a gift to humanity, a symbol of collective suffering. Selflessness can be difficult to navigate in the feminist movement because of the history of female subordination or the internalization of oppression. There needs to exist a balance between selflessness and self-authority. Selflessness, in a shared context, is meant to found a compassionate and universal understanding of all beings, which is the lived expression of the awareness of interconnectedness. Robert Schreyer summarizes a definition of Dharma as told by Bhimrao, Ramji, and Bedkar, which states, "Dharma is that universal morality which protects the weak from the strong, which provides common models, standards, and rules, and which safeguards the growth of the individual. It is what makes liberty and equality effective." Schreyer also refers to Buddhist scholar Masao Abe, who believes that in order to foster human rights, we should eliminate the attachment to doctrine because it upholds intolerance. We should emphasize wisdom rather than justice, and we must come to understand the interconnectedness of ultimate reality in a way that breaks dualistic barriers, as this creates an atmosphere of cultural relativism. Schreyer concludes by saying, "In Buddhist thought, human right may be seen not only as the fruits of wisdom and compassion, but as a means of attaining both."